The first time Nahal walked into the Galactic Alliance Research Station's mess hall, every conversation stopped. Not because she was human, though that was rare enough on the Outer Rim stations, but because of what followed her through the automatic doors. 3 Zephyrian cubs, each no bigger than a house cat, but covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep purple to silver in the artificial light, padded silently behind her. Their large, multifaceted eyes never left her figure as she moved through the serving line, completely oblivious to the stunned silence around her. Commander Adnan, the station's human liaison officer, nearly choked on his synthetic coffee. In his 5 years of diplomatic service, he'd never seen anything like it. Zephyrians were notoriously protective of their young, and these cubs should have been light years away on their homeworld, not trailing behind a xenobiology researcher like lost puppies. "Dr. Nahal," he called out, rising from his table, "perhaps we should discuss your companions." She turned, her dark eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm that had made her famous in academic circles. "Oh, these 3? They're remarkable specimens. I've been studying their pack bonding behaviors for the past 6 months." The cubs arranged themselves in a perfect triangle around her feet, their tiny scales rippling with what Adnan recognized as contentment patterns. One of them, the smallest with particularly vibrant coloring, made a soft trilling sound. "The thing is," Nahal continued, settling into a chair that Adnan quickly pulled out for her, "they've imprinted on me during the research process. Zephyrian cubs form incredibly strong emotional bonds during their developmental phase." As if to demonstrate her point, all 3 cubs sat in perfect synchronization, their eyes fixed on her face. She absently reached into her pocket and produced what looked like small glowing berries, native Zephyrian fruit that she'd somehow managed to synthesize in the station's biolabs. "The fascinating part," she said, offering each cub a berry with practiced ease, "is how their bonding behavior has adapted to interspecies contact. Traditional Zephyrian literature suggests this should be impossible." Around the mess hall, other researchers and staff members watched in amazement as the cubs ate calmly from her hands. Zephyrians were known for their aggressive territorial instincts, yet these 3 seemed completely at peace. Over the following weeks, the routine became legendary throughout the station. Every mealtime, Nahal would enter the mess hall with her 3 companions. The cubs would refuse to eat until she sat down, and only then would they accept food, and only from her hands. The kitchen staff, initially bewildered by requests for Zephyrian dietary supplements, eventually began preparing special portions automatically. Maintenance crews learned to work around the small nest the cubs had built in the corner of Nahal's laboratory. Even the station's normally strict safety protocols were quietly amended to accommodate the unprecedented situation. "It's not just imprinting," Nahal explained to Adnan one evening as they sat in the observation deck, the cubs curled up in a pile at her feet. "They're teaching me as much as I'm studying them. Their social structures, their communication methods, it's all far more complex than we initially understood." Adnan watched as she gently stroked the smallest cub's scales, producing that same contented trill he'd heard on that first day. "The Zephyrian Council contacted me yesterday," he said carefully. "They're curious about your research." Curious or concerned? Nihal's tone remained light, but Adnan caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "Both, probably. No human has ever formed this kind of bond with their young before. Some of the more traditional council members are calling it unprecedented." The largest cub lifted its head, scales shifting to a pale gold, an emotional response Nahal had catalogued as protective alertness. She made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, and the cub settled back down. "Unprecedented doesn't mean wrong," she said firmly. "If anything, this proves that interspecies cooperation can go far deeper than we ever imagined. These 3 have taught me more about empathy and trust than decades of theoretical study could have." As if in response to her words, the smallest cub rose and padded over to Adnan, its scales cycling through a pattern he'd never seen before, spirals of blue and green that seemed to pulse with its heartbeat. After a moment's hesitation, the cub nuzzled against his hand. "That's acceptance," Nahal whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "They're extending their family bond to include you." By the time the Zephyrian Council's diplomatic vessel arrived at the station 2 months later, the situation had evolved beyond anyone's expectations. The cubs had grown noticeably, their scales now shimmering with adult patterns, but they remained devoted to Nahal. More remarkably, They had begun displaying behaviors toward other station personnel that mirrored their relationship with her. Protective, nurturing, and surprisingly sophisticated. The council delegation, led by High Matriarch Veltar, found themselves in the unprecedented situation of observing their own young treating a human as family. The formal observation session in the mess hall became a turning point in interspecies relations. As Nehal took her usual seat, with the empty chair beside her that had become an honored tradition, the three cubs performed their familiar routine. But this time they also approached the Zephyrian delegation, scales displaying patterns of respectful greeting while still maintaining their protective formation around Nehal. High Matriarch Veltar's own scales rippled with what Adnan had learned to recognize as profound surprise. "The young ones honor you as clan mother," she said to Nehal, her translated words carrying undertones of awe. This has never occurred across species boundaries. "Maybe that's because no one ever tried simply sitting with them," Nehal replied, offering the smallest cub its customary berry. "Sometimes the most profound connections come from the simplest acts of care." The mess hall chair remains reserved for her to this day, a symbol of the unexpected ways that understanding can grow when different worlds choose to share the same table. And in the growing field of interspecies psychology, Dr. Nehal's work with the Zephyrian cubs has become the foundation for a new understanding of what it truly means to belong to a family that spans the stars.